with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to Practical Wisdom for Leaders. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Today, it is a true honor to have Richard Barrett. He is an author, presenter, coach, and internationally recognized thought leader on the evolution of human values in business and society. He is the president of the Barrett Academy for the Advancement of Human Values, the founder of the Barrett Values Center, a fellow of the World Business Academy, and former values coordinator at the World Bank. Richard, such an honor to have you with me today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What's not in your bio that you want listeners to know about you?
What an interesting question. Well, I think it's the last 3 years that's not in my bio. It may be in my Wikipedia file. I don't know. But anyhow, I've become a portrait artist.
Really?
Yes. I've got an exhibition going on right now in Hampstead in London.
You know, one of my favorite episodes ever was I interviewed my favorite artist. His name is G.C. Myers. He's located in upstate New York. And it was such a fascinating conversation to have with him because, you know, the topic of this podcast is leadership. And I see leadership in his work. I really do.
Well, I think the key is self-expression. In order to grow and develop and to become all we can become, we have to tap into our self-expression. I call it the expression of the soul, basically. What's in you that needs to get out there that is important for the world? And after 30 years of working in this area of values and consciousness and leadership, I took a couple of years off. I thought I was going to go and become a painter. Well, I am becoming a painter, but actually I got called back to writing books. I've just written one book. It's called Soul-Centered Living from Survival to Service. And now I'm 80% through another book, like 4 months later. And so I think I'm back into writing and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm enjoying the research, the creativity of digging deep into the psyche and understanding who we are and why we're here and what we're doing. And that involves leadership, of course. Yes. But it's in a sense, it's leading yourself. That's the key, is leading yourself. You can't lead other people if you can't lead yourself. And so understanding ourselves is fundamentally important.
Well, I love your phrasing there too, and tapping into who you are and expressing that. And that's exactly what Gary Myers was talking about. He had not yet found a medium to let what was in him out. And then when he discovered painting, that became his outlet. And I'm so thankful for that. I have an image. Listeners can't see it, but you can. I have an image behind me of one of his works. And there's another book called Range. Epstein, I believe, wrote Range. But he talked about how a number of Nobel laureates, you know, they aren't just incredible mathematicians. They are also cellists. They also have another outlet that helps them in another domain, oftentimes make sense of this other domain.
Well, when you plumb the depths of your soul, it's amazing what you can find.
Oh, well said. You mentioned 30 years, decades you've been working on this space of consciousness, of values, leadership. And I was hoping that this episode could be a little bit of a reflection on that work. And we're not going to use the word truths. What do you know to be true? But maybe we could at least dance around that word. After all of this work, kind of what do you sense to be kind of a truth when it comes to humans and when it comes to values? I'd love to start the conversation there.
Accurate answer to that question is that what I learned is evolving. 30 years ago, I developed what became known as the Barrett model, the 7 levels of consciousness model, which is now used in companies all over the world to map their value and then see where they are, and also to map leadership values. And that was the start of what I call my self-realization. I'm writing a new book at the moment and digging into what it is, what do all these words mean, and realize that self-actualization is becoming all you can become within the framework of your existence, not challenging the framework, whereas self-realization is going beyond the framework of your existence and looking more deeply inside. And I self-actualized as a traffic engineer, spent 30, 40 years as a traffic engineer and finished up as an advisor to the World Bank, and then suddenly became bored with that career and didn't know it at the time, but I was actually shifting into my self-realization. And that's been the last 30 years. And so self-realization is fundamentally important. But beyond self-realization, and you don't find many people going beyond that, is transcendence. So it's like you let go of the idea that you live in a material universe and that you have needs. And you live in an energetic universe as a soul. And as a soul, you can actually create whatever you need in your life, mostly just by thinking about it. And all of the concepts that are in our three-dimensional material existence, like fall away. For example, time falls away. And when time falls away, you don't have to worry about patience anymore because patience is time-bound. And, as you learn to let go of the fear that's driving impatience, you become one with this energetic world. That's a little example, but there are more examples. Anyhow, what is it that I've learned? Well, I think I've learned that this journey to transcendence begins when you begin to examine your values. Because up to that point, you've been pretty much conditioned by your parents and the framework of existence you were brought up in, the cultural framework and the worldview based on beliefs. And so now, beliefs are not a really good way of making decisions because they're assumptions we hold to be true, but the world changes so rapidly, beliefs are getting to be meaningless. So you need to shift to values. And that is basically where I started 30 years ago. And I'm most well known for that. Because when I started 30 years ago, nobody was talking about values. It was like, what are you talking about? Values? And now everybody's talking about values. And I kind of moved on into deeper and deeper levels. But knowing your values means that you know what's in your heart at the deepest level. And if you can live by your values, you can live an authentic life. This is a reflection on the book I'm working on right now, which I've got a sort of like a trial title. I'm not sure what the title's going to be yet, but it's really about something called psychological homeostasis. Now, we're all very familiar with biological homeostasis. It keeps the body functioning and in good health, knows what to do. And if you can't handle it, it creates pain, and that gets your attention, and you go and get it seen to.
Yes.
Well, it's the same with psychological homeostasis. It's exactly the same. When you have an upset, when you have an emotional experience, be it positive or negative, or you feel depressed or upset in any way, this is a sign from the soul telling you you're out of alignment. And so now you can perhaps find a way to deal with that. So a subtitle for this book I'm working on right now is something around feeling your way to enlightenment. Because feelings are actually the avenue into the dynamic that goes on between the ego and the soul. The ego has lots of fears and the soul is coming with boundless love, and these two energies don't mix, and that's what creates the upsets and all of the things like impatience, anger, rage, etc. So anyhow, it all comes back to knowing yourself, really, leading yourself, being able to lead yourself. That's where leadership begins, leading yourself. If you can't lead yourself, how can you possibly lead others?
Yeah, and it sounds like one of the starting points of leading self could be to ground yourself in your values.
Exactly. You summed it up perfectly. That's the starting point. And parallel to that, you've got to let go of these parental conditioning and the cultural conditioning of beliefs that build your mental model around what's going on around you. And you can self-actualize within that framework. But if you want to self-realize or self-realization, you've got to go beyond that framework, let go of all of this cultural conditioning and parental approval, if you like, and become yourself. So that is the second aspect. And it's part of knowing your values is not being overwhelmed, letting this parental conditioning and cultural conditioning overwhelm your decision-making. There are many examples of people who, you'll find in the very book, of people who actually almost got to this, although did get to the stage of committing suicide because they had this self-expression within them they wanted to put it out into the world, but they were still operating on the parental conditioning of what the parents wanted them to be. And if they did what they wanted to do, they would lose their parents. And this created a moral, psychological trauma, which they couldn't handle. And I've been researching that. There are quite a lot of examples of that. So knowing your values, letting go of this conditioning so you can become truly who you are and fully self-express as a soul in a three-dimensional material world.
Yes. And, that parental conditioning and that cultural conditioning is, unless you are so focused on doing this work over a period of likely decades, unless you are so focused, I just have a minefield kind of like in my mind. There's just so much that you as an individual have to be so clear that this is a part of your mission, a part of your work that I want to self-realize. That is my true north. That, if it is, then that gives you, a grounding in those values. And then a true north is a potential destination. And minefield might not be the right word or the right image, but we're being taken off track very easily by these other environmental factors. So it seems like a starting point would be the values, but then another, at least, consideration is, I want to do this work. I want to self-realize, and that's my true north.
Exactly. And what I'm saying is, when you stray, so you've got a map of the territory. When you stray off the map, you will feel it.
Yes.
Through what I call the ego-soul dynamic, where fear comes in, creates a disturbance, and you'll realize that you've gone off piste. So it gets you back. If you understand, if you can read the signs, you can get back on track again. Or if you have a coach who can help you read the signs, you can get back on track again. And that's what I'm writing about right now. It goes much deeper than I've ever written anything before, even my books on a new psychology of human well-being, and even my last book, which is called Soul-Centered Living from Survival to Service. It goes beyond anything I've ever written before.
But I love it because I think you just mentioned coach. I've worked with a therapist. I have a mentor. My wife and I walk every morning and she helps center me. And so I love the notion that you have of, look, these feelings, if you're paying attention to anxiety or depression or sadness or anger, they're clues. They're clues that maybe we are not on track.
Clues. They're clues. And they should get your attention. And you've got to learn how to read these clues. Like you've got to become, what's that famous British detective called? I can't remember. He's
Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes. You've got to become your internal Sherlock Holmes. You've got to look at you from the inside, look at all your feelings and your emotions and say, oh, what's going on there? So sometimes I talk to myself. I say, hello, Ricardo. You seem to be upset at the moment. You're out of alignment, obviously. Come on, Ricardo. Get with the program. What is this feeling? Where's it coming from? What's the source? How are you out of alignment? And get back into an alignment. Now, the soul, I say the soul is interesting. Everybody thinks they have a soul. Well, actually, you don't. You are the soul. But your soul incarnated into your body, and that's who you are. But you kind of got lost in three-dimensional material world. The ego developed. It's a part of the soul, but it's a psychic entity that thinks it lives in the material, physical world, and it just takes over because it wants you to survive. And then you get lost in this egoic morass of beliefs that are all conditioned, and you lose your soul. You lose the connection. So a lot of my work over the past few years is about how do you rebuild that connection.
Well, it's very, very well said. You lose that connection. You lose that true north. You lose that opportunity potentially to self-realize, to tap into, I've had some guests phrase it differently, but, who you are and why you're here, what you're destined to be, what your soul wants to be. And so that coach or a therapist, or it could be close relationships, it could be potentially faith. What are some, you mentioned one, a coach, I mentioned a couple. What are some other tools or resources you've come across to help a human being stay the course amid all of the noise?
The well-known ones like meditation and mindfulness, and they all help. And when you focus on spirituality, now, I have this interesting relationship to spirituality. When you completely focus on spirituality, and a lot of people do, they think it's like, that's the path. But they focus on the path and not on the destination. Okay. The destination is soul awareness, surrendering to your soul. That is the destination. When you focus on the path all the time, you'll never get there. You'll have some interesting experiences and they'll take you a little while. But in the end, if you're not one with your soul, you're missing the whole point. That's what I think about spirituality. You get focused on the journey and not enough on the destination. And they're putting your hand up for that.
Well, I have a question for you here, because I think if we talk about conditioning again, let's just for the sake of example, say I am a Hindu. That kind of predetermined prescriptive path is the path. Is what you're saying, that might be fine. And there's probably some good wisdom there and some lessons. It's probably a good way to live your life. And it may not be meeting your soul's purpose. So
this has been quite well researched. There's something called ageless wisdom, which looks at all of these different paths and says that there are some things that are common to all of them. And if you brought up a Hindu, you can follow that path. If you follow a Christian, you can follow that path. And then there's ageless wisdom and perennial philosophy. Perennial philosophy just takes basically all the common parts of all the religions. And ageless wisdom goes further. It looks way back into history. And the problem with labels, you use some labels, Hindu. All right, then. So it's a useful label for if you're living in a three-dimensional material world. But what it does is it creates separation.
Yes.
All right. I use the word Catholic. That creates separation. I decided a long, long time ago, maybe 2 or 3 decades, that I wanted to take all separation out of my life. And so I don't see the world as made up of people from different religions. I just see souls having a human experience, and they've latched onto a particular philosophy that is helping them. But in the end, it's just a philosophy. And in the end, you really have to let that go if you want to transcend this three-dimensional material world, because that's an element. These labels are elements of the three-dimensional material world. And so when you focus on these labels, it's helpful, but in the end, you've got to let them go.
Understood. Other reflections, decades of doing this work. What else are you thinking about right now that was a big one?
Yeah, well, there is a really interesting reflection that comes from spiral dynamics, which I totally agree with. You've got to get to a certain level of conscious awareness. And on my model, it's level 5, I think, where you can actually see beyond your worldview. Up to that point, your worldview dominates. You see through your worldview. And Keegan called this next stage the self-transforming mind. And what I say is that at that point, you can see through your worldview and you can get a perspective on all these other worldviews. But until you get to that point, you can't. And so it creates clashes of worldviews. There was that famous book, A Clash of Civilizations. Well, actually, what that really was about was the clash of worldviews. And I wrote about that in one of my books a long time ago. And so it's these clashes of worldviews that are the issue. And if we can upgrade our teaching and our learning to the point where we can raise people to that level where they can actually see other worldviews alongside their own and take the best things from them, And that level is something I call humanity awareness. And I started many years ago, the Humanity Awareness Initiative, and you can look it up at humanityawarenessinitiative.org. And it's a whole program of how do you transform a whole nation? How do you transform a whole group of people into the worldview where they stop looking, they take up their lenses and they can actually see everything in perspective. What's going on in America right now? Okay. What's going on in America right now? Trump just won the election and he got elected because you live in a democracy. And what does that say? Well, the USA, I'm sorry to say it, elected a person of a certain level of consciousness that represents the majority of the people. Trump is just an instrument of these people. And he says the right things and they like it because most of these people never got their deficiency needs met. And so they don't think America is very great because the American dream has been lost to them and they want it back. But actually what they want is, the problem with America is huge inequalities. So there's a bunch of the richest people can find in the planet to get their inequalities sorted out. Well, I don't think these are the right group for that. Because I think you're going to get more inequality, not less. You're going to get more separation. You're going to get more discrimination. And, that's a reverse direction for the evolution of consciousness. I said at the beginning, we probably wouldn't get into this, but actually we have, never mind.
Well,
no, I'm not bashing Donald Trump. I'm just bashing the system in America that created all these inequalities. I call that worldview wealth awareness. It's a very individualistic worldview that says, I'm going to make money and I'm going to survive and I've got my security through money. Well, okay, if you go to Scandinavia, they've gone beyond that into what I call people awareness, and they've solved all those problems through having a word which you can't even use in America called welfare. And people enjoy paying taxes in Scandinavia because everybody benefits. Well, God, you couldn't even put that out anywhere in USA and have it accepted. That's a completely different worldview.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, as you were speaking, I was thinking of a paper that I wrote with a friend, which was really about how do you design deliberately developmental degrees, where not only are we teaching you, we could say horizontal and vertical development, like you're learning marketing, but you're also developing vertically. Some people don't like that phrasing, but you're developing as a human being. And again, through things like critical reflection, other interventions, we can help the human develop and elevate their thinking, their frame of mind, so that we're getting a both and in some of our educational interventions.
So that is the fundamental basis of what I call the Humanity Awareness Initiative. And it's not new because the Scandinavian, that I'm talking Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, started this program in 1850.
Yeah.
It's program, deliberately developmental for people, started in 1850 and went on for 100 years up to the end of the Second World War. And that is what elevated the consciousness of the Scandinavian nations. These are the best places to live in the world. They're the happiest places to live in the world. And why? Because they paid attention to exactly what you just said. And they developed programs. And you'll find these programs actually on the Humanity Awareness Initiative website.
I mean, it was beautiful. I was in Copenhagen with my wife last year for the International Studying Leadership Conference, and there were young fathers who have weeks of paternity leave to bond with their children. We'll talk about a developmental opportunity for that human adult and for that child. You can't beat that. So from a Maslow's hierarchy standpoint, those needs are met in those societies. It would seem to me, it's not perfect, it's not, a panacea, but generally speaking, it would seem that's the case.
That is exactly true, because what these kids grow up into, what parents are doing is they're facilitating the self-actualization and the self-realization of these children when they become adults. Got to make it so easy for them to follow this evolutionary path. And they've got that. They understand it. And the reason for that is they did something, introduced a program called Bildo. It's in a book called The Nordic Secret. And it was 100 years of teaching in community colleges about how to basically, what's the word they call young, individuate. Yeah, it's not really about individuation. And they did it because the thinkers in Scandinavia at that time saw the Industrial Revolution coming down the path. It was mostly a gregarian society. And they said, we have to prepare our people for living in a different world. And hats off to them. They really did an amazing job. We can replicate this. In fact, I've got a group of people in Brazil. I'm going to meet with them in March in Brazil, who are actually following these ideas that I put out in the Humanity Awareness, which is somewhat a copy of Bildung, what happened in Scandinavia, but on steroids.
Yeah.
Going a bit deeper.
It's a fascinating world. Henry Mintzberg has an interesting perspective on this also. He has a book called Rebalancing Society. And from kind of his view, he sees, again, the Scandinavian countries, they're fairly balanced. He sees that in many places in the world, we've gotten out of balance. And as a result, you get some of these inequalities you mentioned, the wealth disparities that, at least if we look at world history, that doesn't go well.
But the interesting thing is, I look at world history a lot through these worldviews, the evolution of worldviews. And actually, consciousness has been expanding and developing ever since the birth of Homo sapiens. Okay, you go back 200 or 300 years, and if you stole sheep, you could get sent off to Australia for the rest of your life, or you could get hung. You can steal sheep now kind of willy-nilly. I mean, you might have to pay a fine, but that's it. You can get away with it. Well, I'm into stealing sheep.
Sure. Well, we know your alter ego name, Ricardo. So maybe Ricardo steals sheep, Richard.
He practically dreams about it. But anyhow, no, but I mean, we've come a long way. The abolition of slavery, although there are still millions of people who live in slavery, but at least we have international rules about that sort of thing. But many people ignore them. Anyhow, consciousness is evolving, and sometimes it goes back a little bit or reverses a little bit. But on the whole, the world, at least in the Western democratic world, is a hell of a lot better than it was. It's not so true in the authoritarian world, and more that most people live in autocratic regimes, and I feel sorry for them because it actually they can self-actualize in that regime, but they can't self-realize because they can't fully express how they are at the deepest level of their being. Like, you can self-actualize in a regime that's focused on homophobia, but you can't self-realize. You can't declare your homosexuality in most of the countries of the world. Otherwise, you could actually get put to death, or you could get put into prison. And that was true in England until 1950s or 60s.
Yeah. And when a human, my phrasing of this, during the pandemic, my family and I were having a conversation, and we were talking about life. And I just said, it's kind of like people, place, and purpose. Are you, as a human being, tapping into the people will help you be the best version of you? Are you finding your purpose of why you're here on earth and what your soul wants to accomplish? And are you in a place that helps you thrive, helps you be the best version of you? And, for those who aren't and who haven't found that, I think there's a deep-seated, and your phrasing was, it's the soul. And those feelings are indicators that we're off track, that we're not where we need to be.
Exactly.
And so I think I just really, really appreciate how you're thinking about this, because I think it's so incredibly true, that self-realizing and that true north, so to speak, and accessing resources to help us pay close attention to where our energy is, what emotions we're feeling, because that's data, that's information.
Exactly.
And again, I mean, I love the fact that you're exploring art and that you're a portrait artist, because what may not have been something on your radar was there. And even at 70...
This is the impulse. I'd had this 30 years earlier when I was working as a traffic engineer at the World Bank. I got the sole impulse to leave, and the sole impulse came through boredom. I just suddenly got bored with my career. I knew I had to do something. And my friends at the World Bank said, what, you're going to become not a transport engineer, you're going to transform consciousness? What the hell is that? And who's actually ahead of you? And how are you going to do that? And I said, I don't know. I just have to do it. I just have to I call it following the breadcrumbs. But let me just say one thing about purpose and mission and all that good stuff. When you let your ego get involved with purpose and soul purpose, it has to be something grand. It has to be, I'm going to save the planet, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story now about purpose. The purpose of the soul is simply self-expression. And my mother, who lived to 100 years of age, my father died when I was 17. She spent most of her life on her own while I was traveling the world. My father died when I was 17. My mum said, your father wanted you to go to university. And we were poor, my mum and I. She said, if you can figure out how to pay for it, I will figure out how to pay for myself. Otherwise, you're going to have to go out and get a job and look after it. And so I said, okay, well, I can get a grant. And she said, well, I will take a job as the cleaner at the local Methodist chapel. Because my mum hadn't had a job in years. So my mother became a cleaner at the Methodist chapel. And then she began to realize that she enjoyed flower arranging. And then she took flower arranging into the chapel. And she began to arrange, when all the funerals and weddings, they had the most amazing flower arrangements. That was her self-expression. That was her soul. No, it wasn't changing the world. It was just my mom's self-expression was around arranging flowers.
Yes.
And she lived to a ripe old age because she worked in that chapel until she was over 80, just arranging flowers and bringing joy and beauty for people. Well, that is self-expression. And so it doesn't have to be anything great or marvelous. It can be anything.
Yes, I love your phrasing there. I think it's important to ground that it does not have to be change the world or something that is astronomical. It's whatever it is inside you. And I love that story of arranging that helped her live into who she was.
And I'll never forget the funeral. I arranged that funeral. And so what I did was, I thought, I'm not going to have any big wooden caskets. It's a waste of good wood, and metal and brass. So I arranged for her coffin to be made out of wicker.
Wow.
And then I asked them to weave flowers into the wicker.
Wow.
And so that was her coffin. And people really, really got that. And then, in the eulogy, I didn't know this about my mom, but a lady in the chair from the church got up and she said, I'll always remember Mrs. Barrett. She knew how to arrange flowers, and she once told me the secret. And at this point, when she said what she said, I almost broke down. She said, you have to leave a space between the flowers so a butterfly can get through. And mother never had any higher education. She never had a passport. She never had a driving license. But she knew when you arrange flowers, you had to let butterflies get through.
Wow. That's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, that's an example of soul self-expression. And that's what I say. You have to listen. So not only are you listening to your soul to correct your course, but you're also listening to your soul into what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So as I said earlier, I got a message almost 3 years ago, stop writing and start painting. I did. I decided to set the intention of becoming the best portrait painter I could be. And then 6 months ago, I got another message saying, you got to go back to writing. Oh, okay.
Ricardo, start writing again.
Soul-centered living and then immediately I finished that, I'm starting this new book on psychological homeostasis. And in fact, I'm back into that track. I had 2 years of painting, but I still paint.
Yeah.
And so you have to listen for all of that. You've got to pay attention to synchronicity, to soul impulses, to extraneous thoughts. I mean, yesterday, I was in Brighton, which is south of England, and I was walking along the street, and this disheveled young man, emaciated, said, do you have any change so I can get a hot drink? And I thought, I stopped carrying change. Not because of that, because I've got a little thing, So I walked like 30 yards past this man, and I thought, you know what? See, I think I put £20 in my wallet. So I walked back to the shin, and I said, here's £20. What are you going to do with it? He said, first of all, I'm going to get a hot drink. I said, where? He told me that. I said, well, then what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to get a shower. I'm absolutely filthy. I said, that's great. Where are you going? I'm going to this place, Kips. It's a place where people can, Kip is a slang word for having a sleep. So it's where homeless people go for a sleep. He said, I'm going to Kips. I said, okay. He said, thank you. And he said, where are you from? I said, I'm from heaven. You surely are. You made my day today. The extraneous thought said to me, go back. I went back. I listened to that thought and created joy for this young man who probably hadn't only joined his life for a week or two.
Well, Richard, this was so much fun. I really, really appreciate your time today. I always close out these conversations by asking what you've been listening to or reading or streaming, maybe something that's caught your attention recently that listeners might be interested in. I'm going to put a ton of resources and links in the show notes. So listeners, you will know how to access Richard's work on a number of different dimensions. But anything that's caught your attention recently?
Myself. Absolutely. And so probably my most popular book, at least as far as people who purchase goes, is called What My Soul Told. And I can only say what people say. I often get messages saying it changed my life. I wrote that book in 2 months and was like, be patient. So what my soul told me would be what I would suggest people do. I mean, I've got plenty of I've got 50 other books, but that one really gets to the heart of who am I and why am I here.
I love it. I'll put it in the show notes. Self-realization. Richard, thank you so much for an incredible conversation. Thank you for your good work. And I'm so excited that you have a show going on right now of your portraits. That's incredible as well.
It is, yes. You can go to mysoulinspiredpainter.com website.
Okay. Awesome.
You can see all what I'm painting these days. You can follow me on Facebook. You can see elements of the show. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I have a lot of followers on LinkedIn, and some of them like them paintings.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I didn't sell an awful lot, but people like them.
Okay. Listeners, Ricardo, or I should say Richard, in quotes, Ricardo Barrett. Yes. Thank you, sir. Richard is another one of those individuals that is thinking at just 50,000 feet. So I just really, really enjoyed that conversation. And talk about a polymath, an individual who knows a lot about a lot of different areas and really just following his passion and his interests and where his energy is. And can't thank him enough for that dialogue, for that conversation. Those conversations are some of my favorites, where we just go to the stratosphere quick and it's bringing me to my edge. And at first glance, I might hear some things that challenge my own thinking. And I love those conversations because they help me clarify what I think and how I'm making sense of things. So, Richard, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed that dialogue. Take care, everyone. Be well. Check out those links in the show notes. Bye-bye. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.